And welcome back to the Konsume podcast for News Junkies by News Junkies. It is Tuesday evening. This is when we're recording this one. My name's Lance Ranker. I am your host, and I am joined by my big brother, Rick Ranker. How's it going, dude?
Going pretty well, man. Except for the fight over the weekend. I'm still a little pissed about that. But
There
other than that,
there was a fight. I thought it was like a lot of hugging and just like girl slapping.
well, there was some of that too. But
Yeah.
but other than that, I'm doing good.
All right. Well, hopefully you didn't lose too much money on it or win, whatever. I don't know, however you want to consider that. But we've got a little bit to get to. Obviously there's Baltimore, the unrest there is still happening. Sort of what's next for the city. And then Bernie Sanders has decided he is going to run for president. And so it'll be interesting to see whether he helps or hurts Hillary Clinton and her campaign. And then, to kind of cap things off at the end of the show, we'll get into that Mayweather Pacquiao fight. Was it worth the $100 pay-per-view price tag? I say no. But let's start with Baltimore. So, Rick, the Fraternal Order of Police, they are just outraged over the charges of these six Baltimore police officers. And now, in an open letter to Baltimore State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby, the City Police Union's president said that, quote, none of the officers involved are responsible for the death of Freddie Gray, end quote. Continuing the quote, actually. To the contrary, at all times, each of the officers diligently balanced their obligations to protect Mr. Gray and discharged their duties to protect the public, end quote. I'm just going to leave that statement at that to you. Is this hypocritical of them?
Well, there's two things to this. Yes, it's number one, hypocritical, absolutely, because you are an order of police who, by the very nature of their job, arrest people and send them off for prosecution day in and day out, with the comfort that knowing that if you get it wrong, at least there's a trial process that happens so that no innocent person goes to jail. And if these officers had nothing to do with the death of Freddie Gray, as they state, then they really have nothing to worry about by simple indictment or charges pending, because the trial that they send people to day in and day out will be there to avail them of all their rights of the criminal justice system. So for me, the idea that they're outraged is kind of funny, because if they truly believe, and if these officers truly did nothing wrong, then what is there really to fear by putting them up and having them stand trial?
Yeah, very true. And Baltimore's police commissioner, he actually said, and this was about 5-6 hours ago Tuesday, that he didn't know that 6 of his officers would face charges, some including second-degree murder and manslaughter in the death of Gray, until about 10 minutes before the announcement by Mosby, the state's attorney. So he gave this interview to CNN and essentially said and acknowledged that the community lacks trust in law enforcement and police must acknowledge that, quote, we are part of the problem. The community needs to hear that, end quote. But throughout this entire process, you didn't really hear a whole lot from him. It was more of just I believe in my officers, and, nobody did anything wrong, and he clearly tried to hurt himself, and yada yada, and so on and so forth. But isn't this part of the issue, though, is that, you have these officers that may or may not have committed a serious crime, a felony, okay? And then all of a sudden, your first instinct is to protect them, to defend them. All right, cool, great. But then all of a sudden, video comes out, more evidence comes out, and yet you're still calling the people protesting, this constant mistreatment of police, towards minorities, towards the inner city areas, and all of a sudden you want to call them thugs, and as if they're the ones that are actually in the wrong here, even though it was actually your officers and essentially your institution, supported by the police union and the crooks within the police force. And, the one thing that really drives me nuts about the policing in America is the simple fact that even the good cops, which far outnumber the bad cops, lack such a spine because they're so worried about reprisals from the police unions or colleagues that they might, as they would rat them out, that they just simply don't stand up for that badge.
Well, I think the issue is that a lot of police departments don't really have the real transparency that almost any other federal or government agency has. Law enforcement is in a very unique position to where when there's the appearance of impropriety or questions arise over the conduct of an officer or department, there's no independent third party that's doing the investigating. It's always sort of an internal investigation which can impede, real progress into an investigation. So I think that's fundamentally creating an environment where There is no real transparency, and as such, rule of law can't really exist within, oddly enough, law enforcement. So I think that so long as the sole arbiters of getting to the bottom of the facts are the police departments themselves, that's a problem. This is a rare case where officers are actually kicked over on charges to the DA, and they seem to be struggling with that, and that appears to be a real problem for them. And that, to me, should signal that that is a problem for the community they serve.
Well, and just some quick numbers here. All right, so this website, killedbypolice.net, they actually do a really good job of tracking all the deaths at the hands of police officers, whether it's justified, unjustified, whatever. Okay, it's not regardless of reason or method. It just simply implies neither wrongdoing nor justification on the part of the person killed or the officer involved. It's simply tracking all of these events. And so far in May, we don't have any official numbers just yet, but since January of this year, police in America are averaging about 100 deaths per month. 101 in April. Looks like you had 115 in March. All right. February wasn't too bad, only 85. And then in January it was 91. Now, obviously in May, we're off to a great start. And I say that term sarcastically. All right, 538 did a great research piece on this and actually came up with the number that police in America killed over 1,000 people in 2014 alone. And so it seems like, averaging about 100, a little over 100 per month so far is about on par for, our crack team of policing in America here. What are your thoughts there? I mean, obviously those numbers shouldn't be as high. I mean, do they feel high to you?
Honestly, not really. I mean, if you look at LAPD alone, they have 50,000 officers. And I'm sure NYPD is a little more than that. When you think of all the towns and cities across the country, that's a lot of officers. And I would also, if I had to guess right off the top of my head, I'd say at least half of those are just clear and present, threat to life.
They're justified, yes.
So I guess if you're asking me right off the bat, does that number seem high? I say no, not really. I think we're in a particular media trend right now where all police involved shootings are being called into question and scrutinized just a little bit more. But really what makes this a difficult thing to get to the bottom of is that the police departments are not reporting their officer-involved shooting numbers to the FBI as they do with homicides, rapes, murders, property crime, theft, you name it. They are not reporting officer-involved shootings. They have been required to by the DOJ since 1992, I believe, and they simply just haven't complied with that, nor has it been enforced. So the fact that we have to go to a third party for information where we don't have the clear facts of what was justified and what wasn't is problematic because these should be involved with the regular uniform crime report numbers that come out quarterly, and they're not. And I think that ultimately needs to change as well.
And that's just one of the many issues I have with policing in America. And I am thankful that there are men and women out there that are willing to put on the uniform and put their lives at risk every single day to protect me, my family, you, other people, people who really actually feel grateful for them being out there on the streets. However, here's the issue I have is the fact that there's been this shift in law enforcement over the last decade or two to where all of a sudden it's like if somebody is out on the streets protesting whatever, all of a sudden they're considered a domestic terrorist. They're no longer considered a peaceful protester or an American. No, they're basically lumped in with a terrorist now, which is pretty crazy to me. So it kind of sends the message that no, even if you're peacefully protesting, which in my opinion doesn't really create a wave of change anyway, but that's for another debate, I suppose. But why are you basically trying to label Americans as domestic terrorists for simply protesting against something that they feel is wrong? Okay? And then the other issue here is the fact that you've got the freaking Homeland Security grant program that gave out over $1 billion in grant funding last year alone for special provisions and weapons and basically tanks to local police departments, even areas that have maybe 1,000 people living there. That why do you need a freaking tank for crowd control of a small town? The whole thing's made it very lucrative for police departments such as Baltimore and whatnot to get some pretty heavy machinery and equipment that they don't really need to protect and serve the public. And so it's that irritates me as well. And then, of course, some
Yeah.
of their tactics are just downright scary. To where it's like, you don't know whether you can actually trust an officer if you get pulled over or not. Now, I'm fortunate because I'm white and I live in the suburbs, so I guess, pat myself on the back there. But, not everybody is so fortunate to basically be born white.
No, and the 1033 program is problematic just because you're talking about the increased militarization of a police force and, really tying police agencies into the military industrial complex. The same way you see a lot of federal programs now tying the intelligence apparatus into local police forces. Mm-hmm. And I think the combination of that and income inequality in increased numbers are now colliding, where you have a culture of policing that has been increasingly militaristic over the years, in meeting the face of income inequality and police officers sort of extending the bounds of their job to encompass the ego a little bit more. I mean, that's my own opinion, but I think that you're seeing these two things meeting now in Ferguson and Baltimore. So long as there continues to be fires and riots and anything camera-ready violence, I think you're going to see CNN and MSNBC and Fox News and talk radio and newspapers and digital journalism all across the country, all but ready to talk about it in exacerbating detail.
Before we move on to Bernie Sanders, let me ask you this one last question. Do the events here in Baltimore, of course, preceding Ferguson, of course, last year, which is still in the news, do you think this does anything to change police culture in our country? I mean, do you feel that the police departments across the country will become a bit more, I don't know, maybe resentful of the public because, how dare you, demand that we be brought to justice for any of our wrongdoings? Or do you believe that police departments across the country will maybe take a step back and say, we should make some changes with how we deal with the public, specifically minority groups and inner city locations?
I think that's going to depend department to department. I think a lot of the smaller and mid-sized agencies are going to have a lot of resentment within their ranks, but that can be dealt with training. But if you look at agencies like the LAPD, they have a psychiatrist putting together all the training protocol that all of the officers go through for their 6 months in training. They really go through and encourage community involvement and empathy as part of their core operation. So I think that if other agencies can kind of get on track with what the LAPD has started to do in the last few years, and frankly had some pretty good success doing it considering the diversity of our city here, I think that can change, but that's going to be a top-down edict. There's no way that the average rank and file is going to wake up one day and say, God, we really have to learn how to do a better job of creating good relationships with our constituents.
Well, especially considering that many city councils and mayoral staffs and state offices and whatnot that actually run these cities and towns are pretty closely embedded with the police force anyway. So it could be a pretty tough sell in some areas, like you mentioned. But let's get on to Bernie Sanders. It's funny. You and I had a conversation where you didn't think Sanders would actually run, and I was convinced that he would. Turns out Sanders is running, and he says that, he can give Clinton a run for her money, and he doesn't have to take money from Wall Street, and he's vowed that he won't. In a 24-hour period, he raised $1.5 million just through small donations from the lower and middle class folks that actually believe in the message he's trumpeting right now. And now he's not a Democrat. He is an independent. He leans left for the most part, but he's also pro-gun. So I mean, he's kind of got a pretty odd balance there as a left-leaning independent. But how much do you think Sanders running helps or hurts Hillary Clinton?
Well, I guess the deciding factor in whether or not he will help or hurt Clinton, and that could go either way, frankly, is whether or not he is included in the Democratic debates during the primary process. I don't suspect he will if he's running as an independent on the ticket. So the only thing that can really serve to do is to sort of force Hillary to talk about finance reform, to talk about big banks, and put her in a definitive position one way or the other. But I don't really see how Bernie Sanders is going to be able to torpedo Hillary. I think all he can do is force her to answer some of the things she's been able to spin her way out of. And during the primary process, really.
Well, see, and I believe it actually helps her in the sense that she can actually veer a bit more left now without having to worry too much about the moderates or the leaning rights in the political parties and circles, and in the voters as well, to say that she's just simply too liberal. Now all of a sudden she has this person she can compare herself to and actually seem a bit more moderate while kind of appeasing her Democratic base and the more liberal base, more progressive base. Because there is sort of a mild progressive movement happening in the country right now. Obviously, many people were hoping that it would be Senator Elizabeth Warren that would run. As of today, she still says no, she's not planning to run for president. But I don't know, maybe all it takes is one more jab from President Obama and she's like, screw it, I'm in. Because him and her have been sparring quite a bit on TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which could potentially be a disaster, which Sanders is all out against, and Clinton's seems kind of wishy-washy on right now. As far as big money is concerned in Wall Street, Clinton has some serious ties to Wall Street, and she has a lot of big donors. How much can she really talk about breaking up the giant banks and regulating Wall Street without pissing those people off to where she doesn't get any more money?
Well, I don't think she has to specifically come after Goldman Sachs or anybody by name. I think the main thing for her is going to be talking points about how she's going to help everyday Americans and strengthen the middle class and put in, reforms that are sensible, but speak very vaguely and not get specific, so that it doesn't turn off any of the fundraising spigots that she has open.
True. I mean, she can definitely spend that and it would be fine. I think she can navigate those waters just fine. Bernie Sanders is also a big proponent of nationalized health care. He's gone on record and said many, many times that basically in every major country on earth, healthcare is a right of all people, but America continues to fall short, essentially. I mean, he described the Affordable Care Act back in 2010 as only a modest step forward toward dealing with the dysfunction of the American healthcare system. So, I mean, it kind of goes to show how serious he takes the issue of healthcare and just, a national healthcare system to where healthcare for all. Whereas, Hillary Clinton, she sort of championed her own health care package. It was kind of similar to the ACA back when her husband was in office. So I think that would be fairly easy for her to navigate as well. And not too many people are going to really want to trumpet that anyway, on either side. Now, the one area in which I believe that Bernie Sanders can really put Hillary Clinton's feet to the fire is when it comes to income inequality. He can really force her to talk about that at great length, maybe even force her to talk about specific plans to combat income inequality. I mean, do you think that's something that he can really accomplish something with on her?
That I think Sanders can accomplish? Mm-hmm. Income inequality? No. And that's only because the gridlock in Washington has gotten, worse than we ever could have imagined 10, 15 years ago. It's gotten worse. And I don't think that one White House is really a match for the sheer volume of vitriol and rhetoric that comes out of both parties' extreme. I don't think it's any match for a lot of the very large super PACs that can whip vote counts in Congress. I don't think that one person with an ideology and an agenda is going to make that much of a difference unless you make it your signature piece in your first 100 days, which I'm sure if somebody was going to do it, it would be a guy like Bernie Sanders. But no, I don't think that Washington is going to finally, see the error of its ways and say, you're right, we do need to create a middle class. We're in a global economy now. Mm-hmm. There are only two types. You're either a business owner at some level, or you're a worker bee. And if you are a worker bee, good luck to you, because the people calling the shots are not going to give up an ounce of the power, an ounce of the gold for you.
Well, and that's also where unions would come in, but unfortunately I think we only have 4 or 5 states left in the entire country that are union strongholds. Kentucky, West Virginia, and then there are a few others. That slipped my mind right now, but we don't have to get into that because that, again, is another argument for another day. What's interesting is the fact that Hillary Clinton, when Sanders actually announced he was running, basically said on Twitter that, oh, hey, this is awesome, and said, quote, I agree with Bernie. Focus must be on helping America's middle class. GOP would hold them back. I welcome him to the race, end quote. They're pretty much hugging it out. And he's talking about basically Democrats really need to get serious with some of these progressive policies that are actually designed to help the middle and lower classes. Which, like you mentioned, though, we're in a global economy now, and the TPP is something that Senator Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, they both strongly oppose because they don't believe it would actually help the middle class, which it's not going to, because it's only going to further along this global economy that we're in and hand more power to big corporations. And so at the end of the day, Bernie Sanders is already trailing Clinton by 55 points in the polls, in early polls, but still, that's 55 points. He's not going to make that up, especially without any major money or serious donations coming his way. But let me ask you this, though. Does he even have to win the nomination to really kind of get this progressive movement kicked off even more?
The Democratic nomination?
Correct.
So let me get this straight. Is Bernie Sanders running as a Democratic nominee, or is he running as an independent?
Don't know yet.
Okay. Because if he is running as a Democratic nominee, then I don't know that really sways a whole lot. Now, he's got tremendous pull, and he's polling very well in New Hampshire. But outside of that, he's not really going to be able to do much in Iowa or South Carolina or any of the other earlier primary states. So I think this is really just good. I think this is good news early on. By news, I mean news cycle. Mm-hmm. But I don't think he's going to be able to push Hillary in one direction or another. I think she's very adept at being Teflon, a lot like Bill Clinton was. Doesn't have to really answer questions directly or having a meaningful conversation in order to navigate through a campaign setting. And, after you get through Super Tuesday, it's Bernie who. So she doesn't have any real competition in the early stages to keep her honest. So while it's good that he's in the race and that he is bringing up points that he feels need to be said, it's not going to push a Hillary Clinton off of her message because he isn't a significant threat.
I disagree with you to an extent. I don't believe that he's going to push Hillary Clinton off her message in any one bit. I do believe he does help her in the sense that, yes, she can veer a bit more left than she probably otherwise would, simply because now she has somebody she can compare herself to that is basically a progressive socialist. But I also view it as in the sense that Sanders pretty much does for Clinton what Howard Dean did back in 2004 for John Kerry. Just sort of trumpeting that horn a little bit as far as, what needs to be done to take down the GOP, essentially.
To a degree, I feel that it's just the field is way too thin on the Democratic side, mm-hmm. and on the Republican side, it's way too thick. There's too many contenders in the Republican side. Bernie Sanders would be exactly who the Republicans would need if Bernie Sanders were a right-wing libertarian. Mm-hmm. But I guess they kind of have that actually in Rand Paul.
A little bit, yeah.
But for the Democrats, it's not. The field is too thin. We have a presumptive front runner and a presumptive nominee, and I don't see anybody in the Democratic Party wanting to end up on the enemies list of a person like Hillary Clinton.
Well, there is no then Senator Barack Obama in this cycle, so I don't think we have to worry about that. But what happens if Martin O'Malley all of a sudden becomes, sort of this everyman kind of champion?
If that happened, I'd say that they could duke it out, but I don't know that he's going to go too far off in any one direction because he's still unmolded putty. He can be almost anybody the voters want him to be. He just needs to poll correctly and figure out what they want so that he can puppet what they say. Yeah.
I think he'd make a great VP candidate actually for Clinton.
Maybe, I don't know. I mean, he's
got that blue collar hard worker type vibe that I think she could really really spin well.
Maybe it's really going to depend on how the story of Baltimore plays out over the next few weeks and next few months as to whether or not he's going to be radioactive or whether he's going to come out on top of this. And I don't see him as radioactive, but I don't really see him winning this as a political score.
Well, probably not, especially considering Clinton came out, like a day or so later talking about some serious police and prison reform ideas. So, she's already jumped out on top of that.
Yeah, but the truth is it's really just too early to start making deep predictions. We're going to have to get into debate season. We're going to have to hit the convention, and then once we really get into the general, that's where we're going to see agendas shape up and see where they go from there. But right now, it's still new contenders popping into the into the race every day on the GOP side. Mike Huckabee just announced.
Yes, he did.
And the Democrats are, you're going to get it. You know why Bernie Sanders is jumping into this to challenge Hillary or to bring up his agenda items right now? It's because the man knows damn well he is not going to run in a general election. He's toward the end of his career. He can say what he wants to say, and there's going to be no repercussion from the Clinton machine. Well, all the other Democrats, they know better.
Well, that's actually a very fair point, and, it makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, though, he can really get his message across and force Clinton to at least acknowledge some things that she should anyway. And so, like I said, she has somebody to compare herself to. Now, what would make this race on the Democratic side very, very interesting is if Senator Warren did ultimately decide to run, because President Obama just continued to piss her off and egg her on.
Possibly, but then does the president get tempted to get into primary politics?
Well, according to, Governor Greg Abbott of Texas, who is launching the National Guard to fight against just an annual military, tactical, thing. I mean, according to him and others like him who sort of are on that fringe, President Obama might just say, screw the Constitution, I'm running for a third term, try to stop me. So.
Yeah, him and Chuck Norris are the two people that legitimately believe the federal government is coming to take over Texas.
No, not just Texas, but the entire southwestern part of the United States. So, basically, apparently, Barack Obama wants to give all that back to Mexico.
Thanks, Obama.
Yeah, exactly. But let's move on. We're going to have so much more to talk about once primary season really heats up, once we get a few more announcements of who's running, who's not, that sort of thing. Who's crazy, so on and so forth. But Mayweather Pacquiao, there was a lot of grumbling after the fight, for multiple reasons. There was a common theme among Twitter, which I thought was hilarious. Now, mind you, I didn't order the pay-per-view. I actually kind of like, I wonder how much it is. If it's like $40, sure, I'll do it. It was $100. I was like, no, that's like a nice dinner out with the wife, and I'd rather do that because I don't want to see two dudes hugging it out for an hour and a half. It's uncomfortable. But basically, the theme on Twitter was that everybody was saying, wow, Mayweather hugged Pacquiao more than their own father hugged them as a child. So, you saw the fight, right?
Oh, yeah, I did. And, I didn't have the perspective of live tweeting while I was watching the fight. I really I was zoned in and I watched the fight closely. And I'm disappointed with the outcome, but it wasn't a terrible fight. Yes, there was a lot of hugging on Floyd Mayweather's part.
But that's part of his strategy anyway, to prevent the other fighter from scoring points.
Well, usually people don't get that many hits on Floyd that way. So I was expecting him to run a little more than he did. And when he didn't, that was in itself a victory for boxing fans. But for me watching the fight, no, not really worth the $100 price tag. I'm just disappointed with the result. Manny Pacquiao did not perform the way he was advertised to. And frankly, I really don't like the guy. But Floyd Mayweather threw more punches, landed more punches, had a better punching percentage. And he put on more of a show in this last fight than he probably has his last three.
Well, For Manny Pacquiao, it was discovered and reported that he was dealing with a shoulder injury, possibly a torn rotator cuff or partially torn rotator cuff about a month before the fight. They didn't disclose on the official forms talking about injuries. However, they did report that he was taking certain treatments which were not illegal under any of the testing and doping standards. They even reached out and spoke with the Olympic Commission to make sure that he wouldn't fail any test for the treatments he was taking. Apparently, he had requested taking an inflammatory shot, an injection into his shoulder before the fight. The Nevada Commission denied it. They basically said, look, had he disclosed that on the paperwork, they would have had more time to actually weigh it, as well as whether he should have fought or not. In my opinion, from everything that I'm reading and seeing and whatnot leading up to this, it just seems like sort of as a money grab on Pac-Man's part. But, a lot of disappointed fight fans. Okay, and now Mayweather's already talking, I might give him a rematch. Well, that's probably just going to be another money grab. But, I'm curious, though, there are really no major headliners in boxing anymore. Mayweather and Pac-Man, it'll be it, even if they do a rematch, maybe even a third bout if Pacquiao somehow beats him. which, I don't know. The one thing for me is that I learned a lot more about these two men, not fighters, but these two men, human beings, than I ever cared to. And I gotta say, I'm incredibly disappointed in both of them, just as humans. Mayweather, we're well aware, he's gotten multiple instances of just beating the shit out of women. He served jail time, he's been arrested for it, just can't seem to control himself. So, maybe he just shouldn't have a woman in his life with any regularity. And then for Manny Pacquiao, because this whole thing was kind of put up there on some pedestal as good versus evil. Mayweather's an evil scumbag. Manny Pacquiao is this great hero, down from heaven. And not so much, because not only was he largely an absentee congressman in his homeland of the Philippines, but when he did show up, he's done a lot to try to suppress women's rights there in his home country. We're talking about from just education, contraceptives, just basic women's rights. And so, as far as I'm concerned, people trying to basically, tout this as good versus evil or good versus bad or whatever, both these men are just horrible human beings.
Wow. Okay. Well, tell me how you really feel, because you left some room for ambiguity there. I don't see it that way at all. I look at Manny Pacquiao as a good example of how to conduct yourself as a sportsman. I see him as a phenomenal boxer and somebody who, frankly, had the opportunity to shut one of the most hated faces up in boxing that we've seen in easily 10 years. I mean, I'd have to look back to perhaps Prince Nassim Ahmed from the early 2000s to think of somebody who was more dislikable than a Floyd Mayweather Jr. So for me, I really don't see it that way.
So, I mean, regardless of who they are, sort of, outside the ring, I mean, let me ask you this then, because, this was a huge argument for the NFL recently with a lot of the domestic violence issues going on and whatnot. Should athletes even be role models? Should they be considered role models? Should people look up to them?
Absolutely not. No. I mean, the idea that all of, entertainment as a whole, the largest fragment of that goes to sports. Athletes are some of the highest paid people, human beings, on the continent. If you look at the top wage earners of public employees, they are all the athletic directors and head coaches of the NCAA. It's never made sense to me that we've exalted our athletes and sort of relegated the brilliant academic and intellectual minds to some sort of second-class citizen. No, of course not.
Well, it's like here in the United States, we pay our teachers, not quite poverty wages, but for all the crap they have to put up with, you might as well say they are. Whereas out in Switzerland and other, European nations, your teachers basically get treated like doctors and surgeons there. I mean, is this kind of part of just our culture? Because our largest export is our entertainment industry.
And entertainment's fine. I mean, music, film, whatever it is, and sports are great too. But no, I mean, I really don't understand why we as a culture are that way, that we elevate sports to the level that we do. It's not that interesting. It's a bunch of guys playing a game. It can be fun from time to time, and I'm not a guy who doesn't watch sports. I enjoy MMA. I enjoy boxing. I can get into some hockey, and I enjoy Sunday football, from time to time. But as a culture, I'd say there's something dysfunctional about us when that is the epicenter of our entertainment consumption, and the largest paid people outside of bankers are athletes.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's, as a kid growing up, I really looked up to Cal Ripken Jr. And, years later, you start hearing these stories about how he was just a horrible human being to some rookie teammates, hazing them and kind of beating them a bit. And then, of course, that person retracts that story as soon as Ripken says, hey, that wasn't true. You take that back or else. And that's what happens. And so, I think we're left as we get older kind of disappointed in a lot of our young childhood heroes, which are typically athletes, those in the public eye. I wish more kids today would start looking up to the Neil deGrasse Tysons of the world, astrophysicists, like true intellectuals. But they don't really seem to get a whole lot of the attention. So, I don't know. Do you have any final thoughts on the matter before we get out of here?
Yeah, I think it starts in middle school and high school. I mean, if you look at the culture of the locker room and look at the culture of high school in general, it's a different manifestation of that as we get to college. Very similar, but it's just a growth of that. very same dynamics from high school into college and then college into adulthood. That all has very similar parallels. So it starts as children, and we just perpetuate it as adults.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I completely agree with you there. So it's been a great show so far, and I'm glad we get to do this. But that's going to be all for us for tonight. We'll be back again with another show with a lot of great topics. But thank you so much for listening. Be sure to check us out at Konsume.com. That's Konsume with a K. And you can also see us on iTunes. We are on iTunes now. Big timers, right? And
yeah, coming up in the world.
Yeah, exactly. And then also on Twitter at KonsumeHQ. See us on Facebook, same deal. But my name is Lance Ranker. That's Rick Ranker. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great night.